Hey, writers, I just have a quick word about something Brooke and I have been building together that we're super excited about. It's a class called From Page to Pitch to Submission, and it's an 8-week memoir publishing intensive starting September 7th. And one thing that I think is special about it is that you will leave the class with literally everything you need to submit, including a big pitch festival at the end. And then we also have 3 monthly submission support sessions after the class. So you'll leave the class ready to click send.
Yeah, and then you'll have some accountability to get it done after it's over. And the timing is great because I know a lot of writers resolve to submit their memoirs this year. And this is a kind of class that will help them to do exactly that. We're really excited about our guest teachers, Courtney Mom and Dan Blank. And I personally am excited to lead the weeks about the book proposal, which is about the editorial components, marketing components, comp titles, all of it, because the book proposal is honestly where a lot of memoirists get stuck, and it doesn't have to be that way.
No, but learning how to write a book proposal is so crucial. I remember the first time I did it and how much guidance I needed. And I'm leading 2 different submission mindset weeks, one on working with your vulnerability, because anytime we make our work public, it opens the doors to questions and doubts and fears. And then one on rejection, because I think to be an author is to be rejected. And I'm writing a book about it. And want to turn those negative feelings about rejection into positive actions.
For sure. I love the mindset weeks. I think we have a really nice balance in this class. Like I mentioned, we have a great faculty, guest teachers, so do check them out, teaching on pitching and author platform. And then we're going to close the whole thing with a live pitch fest. So we're really trying to make it fun, trying to teach you about how to pitch and what authors need to be thinking about to get in front of agents and editors. So lots of stuff, Grant, to be looking forward to with this very well-balanced class.
Yeah. And then after it's over, we have 3 submission Sundays, dedicated sessions where we're going to gather on Zoom and actually submit together, because finishing the work and sending it out are 2 very different things, and you shouldn't have to do either one alone.
Yeah, so find out all the details at memoirnation.com. Just go to classes and there's a pull down menu and you will see From Page to Pitch to Submission. We would love to see you there. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. info@memoirnation.com is where you can reach us. Onward, people. Let's get some submitting done this year.
Hello, class clowns, truth tellers, envelope pushers, court jesters, and jokers and riddlers. I'm Grant Faulkner, and I'm super excited because today we are talking about comedy, because we have another great comedian on the show, Rosebud Baker. And sometimes people think of memoir as being very earnest and full of trauma and tragedy. And I want to note that one of the wonderful things about memoir is how it allows for different perspectives on the challenges and darkness we encounter in life. And one perspective is humor. And I'm proud to say we've had several wonderful comedians on the show recently, including Jeff Hiller, Jordan Carlos, and Roy Blunt Jr. And I'm here with my co-host, Brooke Warner, who has a lively sense of humor, I know. And Brooke, I've noticed that sometimes when life is frustrating, one thing I admire about you is that you find a way to joke about it or laugh about it, which is a really great and comforting response. Being able to laugh about things is a form of resilience, I think, and it is also a form of support and leadership and a form of strength.
That is true. Yes. That old saying that you have to laugh to keep from crying, I think that appeals to me. Generally speaking, of course, laughter alleviates pain, which is really important when it comes to some of the topics that we talk about on this show, Grant. And I think, memoir in general contains pain, and being with your own story is sometimes actually painful emotionally, psychologically, so of course, you have to find ways to get through that. And to laugh is to bring comfort. And I think that one of the things we know as human beings, of course, is that these 2 things coexist. They feel paradoxical, but there is, there's the both and part of that. And it's really important when you're writing memoir.
Definitely. That's so interesting. And I often ponder the often repeated definition of comedy, which is tragedy plus time equals comedy. But I was thinking about it, and tragedy plus time also equals memoir. So they're strange bedfellows, comedy and memoir. And I'm looking forward to really delving into the nature of comedy as an art form and a storytelling form because I've actually been thinking about it for years. So I was wondering if you have any particular memories or perspectives on what comedy has meant to you in your life, Brooke, and your ability to laugh at things as a way to deal with them. Not all people have that ability. And I think those of us who do might take it for granted or might not even notice it.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I think of that word comedy, it doesn't totally feel like a through thread in my life. But when I think of the word funny, it does.
Yeah.
Like my mom's side of the family are very funny people, the Gasparaviches. And this really stemmed from the dynamic, I think, of the four original siblings, my grandfather being the oldest, whose parents were immigrants from Croatia. I think a lot of people who are immigrants, have humor by way of survival. All of the kids and the kids in this family are funny, and part of that is like hard scrabble existence that they had, the funny stuff that happened, much of it, which was, by the way, kind of tragic in its own right, like, not having enough food and stealing cars and gambling and, all kinds of wild stuff in the backstories. And yet there's always laughter in that. Right. And so there's that through thread. I feel like as a person, I also gravitate toward funny people. Like if you can make me laugh, then you're a keeper. And Grant, I think that's why you and I have lasted as long as we have as co-hosts.
It's definitely a requirement, yeah, there's nothing quite so pleasing as someone laughing with you.
And I think even more so when we're covering really tough topics, and so that is important, especially because every week in and week out could be very heavy. But you are very funny. So tell me about that. Like, have you always known you were funny?
Yeah, I don't think I did. I do remember doing weird improv when I was a kid and getting my brother and sister to laugh a lot. And I think a lot of people's their trial run as humorous is with their family. And even when you were mentioning your ancestors, when they were hungry, and I think that would be the hardest thing to make a joke about, being hungry, So, but I've been a kind of casual student of comedy, I think, my whole life, and especially the last 15 years, especially because I really getting obsessed with Mark Maron's podcast. He was kind of a washed up comedian back then, but he was a podcast pioneer, and it was really interesting the way he kind of blended life stories and comedy in his interviews, and then I think growing up with Saturday Night Live, especially in the 70s, just influenced me so much. I was 10 or 12 when SNL first aired. And I was just a heavy watcher of also, like, there were so many variety shows when I was growing up. There's Carol Burnett and Lucille Ball and Flip Wilson and Red Fox. And just so glad I grew up in the golden age of the variety show. But I also love our current golden age of the podcast form, in part because it's really perfect for comedians. And so many of them have started podcasts over the years. And during the pandemic, it seemed like every comedian was piling in to do a podcast because that was the only platform that was available to them. So I have a whole list of wonderful subscriptions in my queue, to the point that listening to comedy is the way I go to sleep. Beyond that, though, I think comedy is the capital THE art form of our age, much like memoir, in that we need its truth-telling and the way it unearths supposedly shameful events, and the way it grounds us in our foibles and flaws, and the way it just generally pushes the envelope by saying what few others will say, and the way it breaks taboos as well. So I'm interested in definitions of comedy, in part because comedy is kind of ineffable. Just as you were saying, there's that weird both and between tragedy and humor. And everyone seems to have their own definition of comedy. And the famous formula that I mentioned, tragedy plus time equals comedy, actually comes from Steve Allen, who wrote about it in a 1957 Cosmopolitan interview. I researched it. And he said, man jokes about the things that depress him. I guess Steve was a little bit sexist there, but he usually waits till a certain amount of time has passed. I guess you can make a mathematical formula out of it. Tragedy plus time equals comedy. And then Mike Birbiglia, who's one of my favorites, has a wonderful podcast that essentially pursues this question, and he added a qualifier. Comedy is tragedy plus time, but the time is different for everybody. So for a memoirist like our guest, Rosebud Baker, who writes about alcoholism and her sister's death and IVF and more, that revision matters enormously. The time it takes to make your own life funny. It's not a fixed variable.
Right. And that's the memoir version of it too. It's a question like, when is it okay to write about something that happened to you? I think that's a big question that people face, especially with stuff being too raw on the page. Rosebud is writing about things that happened at very different distances from where she is now. And somehow she is funny about all of those things. I mean, that's the gift of funny writers. Like she was probably destined to be a comedian, or at least she had the disposition to be one, because as she said, she grew up as a loudmouth who preferred honesty over politeness. And then she spent her 20s trying to make it as an actor in New York. Like many actresses, gigging as a barista and also as the world's angriest yoga instructor, in her words. I think that's very funny. Also, while struggling with alcoholism, of course. And so a solid chunk of the memoir turns on her drunken 20s in the early 2000s in New York City. And then this gives rise to her comedic voice. And she does parallel childhood memories of her mother's alcoholism with her own struggles to get sober. It's like that stuff doesn't super sound funny, but I think like you can imagine the way that if you have a dark sense of humor and an insistence on saying the awkward things out loud, that it could in fact be very funny. And that is what propelled her comedy career as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting the way she balances these little touches of comedy when talking about really dark subjects. And also the way she talks about how her alcoholism actually did help her become a comedian. That's the way she sees it. And so it's her edge and her ability to be one who prefers honesty to politeness that's interesting to me. And I think this is a quality that memoirists must have to some degree as well, but a comedian's edge comes with its own unique sharpness. And I think back often to this job training that I was in, I don't know, maybe a decade ago. And the instructor said he liked to crack jokes, but he wouldn't make jokes at anyone's expense. And I've literally been thinking about this for years because I'm not sure if you can make jokes without them being at someone's expense, and I think about it in the most basic comedic terms, like someone has to slip on the banana peel, even if that's you. And George Carlin said it directly. He said, comedy is a socially acceptable form of hostility and aggression. That is what comics do, stand the world upside down. And Carlin's take was that comedy requires a target. Even self-deprecating comedy targets a version of the self. And the question isn't whether hostility is present, it's whether the comedian knows where they're aiming it and why. And so Carlin also said, a person of good intelligence and sensitivity cannot exist in this society very long without having some anger about the inequality. So for him, the hostility in comedy wasn't cruelty, it was conscience, which I find, very interesting given where we are in our society now, because I think the best comedy somehow captures the anger of injustice and gives voice to it at the same time, because it frames it all with humor.
Yeah, and it does remind me of something that Tina Fey said, and I had to look this up, but she said, if you want to make an audience laugh, you dress a man up like an old lady and push her down the stairs. If you want to make comedy writers laugh, you push an actual lady down the stairs. So it's horrible, but it's also...
We laughed.
Yeah.
We're comedy writers.
I mean, it's so true. It's like the more extreme you go, the more shocking it is, and the more your response is to be somewhat delighted by that. And that's human nature.
Yeah. Well, Tina Fey is definitely a favorite of mine. And not only as a comedian, actress, writer, and producer, but also as a memoirist. She's my age and she came up in the 90s and she faced a lot of sexism in comedy and she's provided a lot of biting commentary. And it's funny because Jerry Seinfeld has said that the world of comedy is the most just meritocracy because people either laugh or they don't. So no one's privilege matters. But the world of comedy has definitely been as sexist as any others. And I want to harken back to Christopher Hitchens, who wrote a famous 2007 Vanity Fair essay called Why Women Aren't Funny. And I know he wasn't the only one to say this. Jerry, what's that?
I said, dude.
Yeah. even the surrounds. I won't go into it. Maybe we can do another episode on that one. But Jerry Lewis said something similar before him. So that thought goes way back. And it's obviously horrendously false, if only because many of my favorite comedians are women. I made a short list. Tina Fey, Amy Poehler, Wanda Sykes, Ali Wong, Chelsea Handler, just to name a few. And going back to my childhood, I mean, women kind of defined comedy for me. There was Lucille Ball and Carol Burnett and Joan Rivers and Gilda Radner. So that list is endless. And also, I'm going to recommend the TV show Hacks, which speaks to this very question.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love Hacks. I'm not quite past this final season and enjoying it so much. But, what's obviously so stupid is that this argument was never really about whether women are funny. It's about who's allowed in the room. To your point, Hacks is going at that very directly. Who got reviewed, who got the deal, who gets the specials. Moms Mabley, who is arguably the first stand-up comedian in the modern sense, was doing all of this decades before Hitchens was even born. And she was subversive and political and wickedly funny. And she wasn't on television until her 70s because no one would put her there. So she used the vessel of a frumpy old granny persona as her costume, which is very Rosebud Baker, actually. The messy memoir framing of her memoir is a type of costume, giving her permission, which I really love. I actually saw Wanda Sykes in the last year on stage. Super hilarious.
Yeah, I love her.
My God. I mean, her physical comedy, too. That's another piece. If you can do physical comedy, you've got me. But she has said, people are going to label you anyway. But the one thing that bugs me the most is one of the funniest female comedians. There is no funniest male comedians. You're either funny or you're not. Grant, you and I have, of course, discussed this where it comes to books, and this idea that there's women's fiction, but no men's fiction. And so that's a gendered qualifier that happens right here in our own world. And it is not a compliment.
Wanda Sykes named the problem perfectly. And, she reflected on her own experience and said a woman would often pitch a joke in the writer's room and get nothing. And then a man would pitch the same joke and everybody would laugh. And, writers' rooms at TV shows are notoriously sexist. And I have to say also that my wife, Heather, says this happens all of the time in her workplace as well, not with jokes, but with ideas. And it just drives her crazy.
Yeah, I've experienced that firsthand as well. I mean, obviously, most women have if you're in a work situation, and it is crazy making. I think mostly it is unconscious because it's such a conditioned behavior. But since we're bringing up smart comedians we love, I really do want to mention Tig Notaro, who, I mean, she just starts talking and I start laughing. Her delivery is so amazing. But she walked on stage at LA's Largo and opened with, "Good evening. Hello, I have cancer. How are you?"
Once again, I laugh.
Yeah, like in just a few months, she had gone through all of these things, like a breakup, a life-threatening infection, the death of her mother, her cancer diagnosis. And so she did this tragedy plus time formula on stage. And it's one of the most tragic and hilarious shows you will ever watch. If you have not seen it, you have to make time for it. Like, it's a legendary stand-up set. You can easily find it on YouTube. I remember watching that, actually, Grant, on a plane. And it was awful because I was crying, laughing. And when you do that on a plane, and I'm like, I should really stop, but I couldn't because it was just too good. And there's a way in which it's a type of memoir, when you listen to comedians, because they're telling their true story and just doing it in a way that is about, delivery and keeping you hooked.
Totally. And that Tig Notaro bit, or that show, that was all, she was ad-libbing it. She didn't write it, but it's just like, it's so perfect. And pain is at the center of so much comedy, obviously, and so much art, of course, but ironically in the sense of comedy, because, it like we've been commenting on, even through our laughter, pain shouldn't be funny, but pain is what makes comedy so poignant, I think, because it is the transformation of pain into comedy of all things, and it's just a mystery how and why that happens. Richard Pryor said, all humor is rooted in pain. And elsewhere he said, two things people throughout history have had in common are hatred and humor. And I am proud that I have been able to use humor to lessen people's hatred. And so Pryor is the bridge between Carlin's kind of hostility theory and then something more redemptive. Comedy as a way to metabolize pain into something that can be shared. And comedy is not what happens instead of pain, it is what happens with pain when someone is brave or angry or desperate enough to find the joke inside it or the memoir inside it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is what Rosebud does. She's funny and warm and loves the people in her life, but also really goes dark, and goes to places that maybe some people would flinch from. I've been thinking about that kind of stuff in my own writing, as like that line. I think all of us are kind of exploring how far we're willing to go in the first place. And so I'm really curious how she identifies as a comedian, like if she relates to George Carlin's comedy as socially acceptable form of hostility, like you said, or Prior's view that it's rooted in pain. And then there's Amy Poehler, who has a different view that people are most beautiful when they're laughing and being chased in a fun way.
Yeah. Well, let's definitely ask Rosebud that. And I should add that Rosebud is the granddaughter of White House Chief of Staff in both Bush administrations, James A. Baker III, who is a character in her story. She comes at life and comedy from a very privileged place that is only privileged in some ways, though. She grew up in a world that was simultaneously super privileged and also very destabilizing. So she's very aware of that privilege and she names it directly, which I appreciated. And she's also clearly someone who spent years feeling like she didn't belong anywhere, not in that world and not in the comedy world and not in her own skin most of the time. So I know we're going to be getting a big dose of funny truth in this interview. So we'll be right back with Rosebud Baker after this short break.
Hello, listeners. I just want to let you know that I had one of those run-of-the-mill technology meltdowns ahead of the interview with Rosebud. And so this is Rosebud and Grant. Enjoy, and I'll be back after it's over for the trend.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back. I'm super excited to introduce our guest today, Rosebud Baker. And Fully Baked is Rosebud's riotously funny and emotionally resonant debut memoir. And it's inspired by her pregnancy and early motherhood and her quest to discover who she really is and how she wants to raise her daughter. She harnessed the qualities she once saw as defects, her dark humor and insistence on saying the awkward thing out loud, into a comedy career. And a professional breakthrough came in 2018 after Amy Schumer DM'd Rosebud on Twitter. How exciting that must have been, and asked her to open for her. Probably had to go check to make sure it was the real Amy Schumer, or I would have.
Yeah.
And then Rosebud went on to write for Inside Amy Schumer, That Damn Michael Shea, and Saturday Night Live. And she's released 2 stand-up specials. Welcome, Rosebud.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
It's a treat to have you today. And I wanted to start with your title, Fully Baked, which I loved as a title because it works on about 4 different levels by my count.
Mm-hmm.
There's the pregnancy reference, obviously. There's the weed reference. There's the I'm done, I'm cooked, I'm finished kind of exhaustion energy that every new parent has. And then there's this sense of like, I'm finally a complete person. I'm not sure anyone can really say that, but which one were you going for, or were you going for all of these?
I was going for all of them.
Yeah.
I was going for all of them. I'm glad you caught that. I mean, I wouldn't say that I was going for being a complete person, but sort of the aiming for that my whole life and sort of realizing that there really is no point at which you're able to point to yourself and go like, okay, all done, like,
Not fully baked.
Yeah. This like striving for some sort of finality and perfection and realizing that that's just like a fool's errand, really.
Yeah.
That it was all of those things.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
and there was also Baker, which is, I was like, it's kind of a little play on the last name as well. So,
yeah. I got that too. So yeah, 5 things. Well, you're a comedian by training. So much of your craft is about compression and timing and the perfectly placed word. Memoir is sometimes the opposite of that, because it can be more sprawling and searching and recursive. So I'm curious, like, was it a challenge to go from being a comedy writer to a memoir writer?
Yeah, it was an unbelievable challenge. It was crazy. I got into it and then was like, oh no, this is horrifically challenging. I had to basically undo every instinct that I have as a writer, which is to compress, like you said, and cut down and focus on word economy and focus on, and also focusing on keeping it light, like don't get into the gritty details because that'll bum everybody out. Memoir is, in a lot of ways, I had to go back to like my acting training to write it because I was like, okay, every emotion has to be accessible. Every emotion has to be written about. So like write all of it and then go back and see if there's jokes and see if that's where a joke belongs or if it's going to take away from the rest of it. Like I couldn't value the joke over everything else. I did value it a little bit more because I am a comic and that's, it's a comedic memoir, it's a comedian's memoir. So obviously I wanted to keep it funny, but I also really just wanted to tell a story. I really just wanted to tell a story. And I was like, this is a chance to tell a story in a way that I'm not used to telling one. And it's a very personal story. And, a lot of my stand-up is very personal, but I really appreciated the opportunity to dive in that way.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting if I picked this up right, that you wrote the gritty part first and then went back and looked where you could put in some humor. And I think that's so interesting just as a process, because I don't know if I was a comedian, what I might lead with, but that sounds reasonable that you'd go to the more traumatic parts and then.
Well, I had to, because originally I tried to focus on the joke and I was just getting nowhere in the story.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. Well, the book covers your mother's alcoholism and your own in parallel, almost like two timelines that keep converging. And so I'm just curious about that structural decision. Was that something you figured out in the writing? Did you discover it in the writing, or did you decide on that to start?
That was something that I discovered in the writing. And it's also just something that you discover in your own life, when you get to a certain point in your life, you start to see parallels between yourself and your parents, and you start to realize what parts of them you picked up and which parts of them you are just inherently, they're just baked into your DNA. My mother and father were so polar opposite. And yet I really do feel like I am equal parts of them. And to answer your question, it was something that I discovered in the writing.
Yeah, I think that often happens, that the shape emerges kind of in its own way, I guess. Well, you know what? I feel like I kind of grew up with your grandfather, James Baker. He's been almost in my life, since I was, I guess, a teen, a little bit beyond a teen. And you described him as famous yet unknowable. And I'm just curious about writing about someone who is both, very public, but also very private to you. I have a hard time even putting a Facebook post up about my father, So how did you navigate that? What did you feel you could say and what was off limits?
Well, I did not consult anyone. I just wrote from my perspective of him, which was, that this was how I felt. And he and I are very different politically. And there's a lot that he did, his administration did, that Bush's administration did, and that Reagan's administration did, that I think laid the groundwork for the position that we're in now. And reconciling that in my brain is an impossible thing. But it also, when I was writing the book, I was like, if I get into that, that's a whole other, I could write a second book about that. I really could. Mm-hmm. So I just decided to focus on the emotion, the feeling of someone being larger than life, but in your life, and how difficult it is to reach someone, who is famous. And I've been around a lot of famous people now,
I bet.
There is always this kind of, I don't know how to describe it. It's almost like, when we were in COVID and there was that like glass wall between us and whoever we were ordering food from. Mm-hmm. That's a little bit what it's like to know someone famous. There's just that glass wall there. Like they're right in front of you, but they're a little untouchable.
Yeah, that's so interesting, especially the way you express that, because I'm thinking about famous people I've been around, and it is, and I bet you felt this so much more profoundly, that, as you put it, you were both inside and outside at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah, I can't quite imagine that. I think like it gets into so many memoirists, maybe every memoirist of any sort of kind of sensitivity has struggled with how do you write about loved ones. And as I mentioned, like when my father died, I didn't even post it on Facebook because I just didn't think that's what he would want, But it's interesting because when you're writing, especially memoir, and you've got to write about those people, if they were part of your life. There's the old Annie Lamott saying that they should have behaved themselves better if they didn't want to end up as characters in your memoir. So how did you go about, thinking about writing about your loved ones and this sort of sensitive light?
I sort of disagree with the idea that they should have behaved themselves better, Nobody's going to live their lives trying to avoid being in someone's memoir, What a shitty life. I mean, I feel like if you're going to write about your experience, you have to write about your experience. You don't necessarily focus too much on like what it is that how they may have done you wrong or some sort of like it. To me, it was like, especially when it came to my mother and, we both struggle from we both live with the same disease. I mean, we're both sober now, but we both live with the same disease of alcoholism and addiction. And I tried to write about her with the same compassion that I would have for myself. And I would say probably a bit more, because as a mother now, and as a new mom writing this book, I was like, well, karma's a bitch, like let's have some compassion because this could be me. And so I wanted to write about her and the mistakes that she may have made within the context of like, this is alcoholism and this is what alcoholism does to people. This isn't like the person making a choice. This is alcoholism driving this person to do things that they would never do. And, there is so much misunderstanding and so much stigma still around addiction, I would say in large part because of the Reagan administration. But I think we have to have more compassion for addicts. And so I write about addiction with as much compassion as I possibly can.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And what you were saying about motherhood too, we all reckon with that once we become parents, especially. And your book is framed around pregnancy and new motherhood, but it's really a book about your origin story and just what you were saying about your mother and gaining sympathy for her. So you mentioned alcoholism in particular and the things behind that alcoholism, but I was wondering if there are other ways that becoming a mother made you, kind of understand her better in particular ways.
Certainly. Just how fried she must have been. Like, just how absolutely fried she must have been because of how the country that we live in and the government that we live under and the society that we live in abandons mothers in such a crazy way that we are encouraged our entire lives to like get married and have a baby. And just like, even from our toys as kids, that becoming a mom, I mean, the drastic shift in visibility that I felt as a woman without a child and then a mother was devastating to my sense of self and my sense of purpose. And I'll never stop talking about it. It will never stop being something that I was absolutely like radicalized by. And so when I look at my mom who had 5 children, I'm absolutely blown away. I mean, the fact that she wasn't shooting heroin every night is a miracle. Like truly, I'm like, this is a stressful thing to do. And especially for someone who is an artist, which my mother is an incredibly gifted painter, who had to put that aside. I mean, she no longer does. She's still painting, and her paintings they get better every year. But I just have this kind of, now I go, oh God, because when you're growing up, you don't even think of your mom as like a person. You're just like, yeah, that's like, I'm her life. And if she's doing it right, you are, like if she's doing it, if she's doing it right, you are right to feel that way. And she was an incredible mom. So I feel like I'm just yammering on about this, but the short answer is that now I fully understand why she cries when like the wind blows too hard. Like her nervous system is forever changed. And now I understand why when she comes to New York, she's like, I have to get back to Maine, like I understand, because she has this beautiful life by a lake where she paints, and that's all I would ever want if I had 5 children.
Yeah, I liked how a big part of your sympathy was in understanding her exhaustion. And that's certainly something we really can't know until we have our own children to understand a parent's exhaustion. But to have 5 children, I can't imagine. I had plenty on my hands with 2. I've talked to so many writers, and I've wondered this about myself as well, how this intersection between drinking or drugs and art and what leads to what. And I thought it was really interesting the way you wrote about leaving behind, and this is quoting you, the bulletproof confidence of your drunken identity as, one of the scariest things you've ever done. And that line just stayed with me because sobriety is usually framed as gaining something, not losing something. And the book tracks a version of you who thought her defects were disqualifying and a version who discovered that was the whole point. So I'm just curious if you could have found comedy without the drinking years, or were they just somehow necessary to each other? And what did you actually lose when you got sober, and how long did it take to grieve it?
Wow, that's like 3 questions.
It is. It's too many. Should we back up?
One at a time. Give me the first one. First one.
Do you think that you could have found comedy without the drinking years, or were they somehow necessary to each other?
I don't think I would have found comedy without the drinking years. I don't think I would have found any of what I found without the drinking years. Alcohol was an integral part of my development as a human being. Mm-hmm. It really saved me during a time when I had no tools to deal with the trauma that I was going through of losing my sister and the way that I lost her, and then leaving home afterwards to go to school and dealing with those emotions by myself. It truly saved me before it tried to kill me. And it was like a best friend that suddenly turned on me. I remember when it stopped working and feeling like, wait, something's horribly wrong here. Like it never felt like I was the one making these mistakes. It felt like, no, I did the thing that I always did to make myself feel better. And there was a glitch or something. Like it just didn't work. I just didn't do it right. And I just kept trying to like adjust the way that I did it, or adjust the timing of it, or adjust the amount that I ate beforehand so that it would hit me right, or, but every time it just started, there was like, I don't know, it just stopped working. But it was very valuable before that.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I haven't heard people quite use those words, but I'm right with you. As you said, drinking was the best friend to you. That's always what it's been to me as well. And it's a really strange metaphor because, like you said, that friend can betray you, harm you, whatever, wear out its welcome, all those things. Just, yeah, it can be a weird friendship, I guess. But it is great. A friendship, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I remember the first time I did it, just being like, I want to do that for the rest of my life. That was amazing. That's the way I'm supposed to feel. I mean, I should have seen that as like, oh, this is why it's dangerous to me. But I was 17, you know?
Right.
So what did I know? I was just like, oh, this is how everybody else feels, because all I could see was the outside of everyone else. And they seemed confident and happy. So if this made me feel the way they looked, then it must be right. You know?
It's a strange thing, because I remember my first drink, I wasn't 17, I think I was 16 at a drive-in movie theater. And I finally broke down, right? Like friends had been trying to get me to drink for a long time. I was like one of the last ones. But from the first sips, it felt like home, you know, just like you described it. It was like, wow, here I am. There's no going back. Well, you know, in closing, I mentioned to you earlier that Brooke and I were talking about the definition of comedy and the different ways that comedians have approached it or described it. I think comedy is so interesting because so many people do try to describe what makes people laugh. And so I'm just going to give you a few here. And if you could kind of think about where you might fit or don't fit within these definitions. So George Carlin thought of comedy as a socially acceptable form of hostility, of anger at the worst of the world's injustices. Like it was a kind of political and an existential stance. Richard Pryor believed that all humor is rooted in pain. And then Amy Poehler takes a lighter approach. She thinks that people are most beautiful when they're laughing and being chased in a fun way. So how do you identify with those definitions, or what is yours?
I would say that all of my humor is rooted in pain. That it comes out that because my go-to when I'm feeling pain is to go straight to anger first. And the only thing that makes my anger socially acceptable, because I'm a woman, is to do it with a smile and to do it with a, laughing. And what did you say? She said being chased.
Yeah, I think she was thinking the more frolicking, whimsical premise of comedy, you know, that she says that people are most beautiful when they're laughing and being chased in a fun way. I think the fun way is key here.
But that's most beautiful, not the most funny.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that I agree with that. I agree with that one wholeheartedly. But yeah, I would say that I have to say the things I'm angry about, like I'm laughing and being chased, because I'm a woman. And if I'm up there actually angry, then everybody feels that and they feel threatened by that.
Yeah, so, that's interesting. Because a lot of male comics really lean on the anger, right? Like George Carlin in particular, I guess. Yeah. I mean, I do too. I just do it with a smile. And then people go, oh, she's not really angry. I'm like, I am. Yeah. Well, I think that's the best comedy, when you can kind of mix, I guess, two things at once. Yeah. And the best memoirs. Thank you. Or more than two, actually, because we got 4 or 5 out of your title alone. So
yes.
we'll got Fully Baked. Thank you so much for joining us, Rosebud. It was so fun. Fun's not the right word. It was so just interesting to hear your very unique takes on these different parts of life. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Grant. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll be right back with today's book trend.
Well, Brooke, I want to talk to you about a study that just came out this month from the Authors Guild, and they surveyed active readers, people who read at least 1 book in the last month and 4 books in the last year, and they asked them, where they got the books they read. I've actually always kind of wondered this question myself, especially as a writer who hopefully is getting paid for that. And the number that jumped out, only 25% of books were bought new. 1 in 4, and I don't think I would have guessed that. I might have guessed, dramatically higher, maybe 60 or 70%. But yeah, 3 out of 4 books that are being read right now, actively read by engaged readers, the author got little or no money for. And that's a significant number. And, these aren't casual readers. These are the people who read constantly and are driving book sales in general.
Yeah, I mean, how people discover books and access books is always really interesting. And this breakdown of the numbers is especially fascinating because 29% came from public libraries. I do want to say I have a lot of friends who use the library, but I don't think like 29% of people in my own life necessarily. So that was kind of interesting, although also great. 16% were borrowed. I'm a big borrower of books and I lend people books, so I get that. But the report also does include piracy, which is not the kind of lending and borrowing we want to see in book publishing. 19% came from people's own personal collections, meaning books they already owned. So that's super interesting. I don't really, or I should say, I don't often go back and read books that I already own, but I always want to. And then 10% were bought used, which is actually less than I would have expected.
Exactly. That last figure caught me by surprise as well. But, the irony for me is that the most devoted readers, the one who build, personal libraries and who use the library and who share books with their, social circle, they're also the readers least likely to be putting money in an author's pocket. And I'm like you, I want to just state I'm a big supporter of libraries and I love my local library so much that I'm one of those people who I get most of my books there as well. And that's just in part because my tiny little house is so stuffed with books, we don't have any place to put them. And our books actually seem like a fire hazard at this point. But that said, I'm, of course, as I mentioned, always concerned about authors earning money. And, this is related to the author income crisis, I think, on some level. The Authors Guild's last income survey, which came out a few months ago, I think, found that the median income of a full-time author from their books is $10,000 a year. And that's down 42% since 2009. So this study suggests part of the why. It's not that people aren't reading necessarily, it's that reading has been decoupled from paying in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's interesting. And per what you said about libraries, certainly we are not villainizing libraries, and libraries do pay for those books, but the thing is they have one copy and they lend them over and over again. But I think many readers would be very happy to know that their books are in a library and that people are checking them out. Active library members read 16% more than non-members. So that's another piece of it. Like I have friends who are just like voracious readers, and the library is kind of essential. So libraries are growing readers and they're growing reading culture. So that's also an important piece of this. But it is also important to say that according to this data, basically they are substituting for purchases. I mean, so, it's all the things. We have to look at it in this nuanced way. It also said active library members bought 42% fewer new books than non-library readers. No surprise there. And then the detail that complicates any narrative, this study has one too, and that's that readers most likely to borrow from a library instead of buying are, drumroll, college educated, employed full-time, and earning more than $75,000 a year. Of course, these are the people who can afford to buy books, but they are active library members instead. So, I don't know. What do we do with all this information, Grant?
I don't know. Should we peer pressure all these relatively affluent people to go out to their bookstore and buy some books? No, it's like this is one of those trends that I find really interesting to report. And I am a little bit not sure what to do with it because I think the honest answer is that the system has made borrowing so frictionless and buying feels so optional that even people who love books like me and could afford them have just, drifted away towards the free books. And part of the reason I love my library is that I can get pretty much any book in the world in a matter of days. That the online capabilities of libraries are just wonderful and they make it so easy to check out books. And if my local library doesn't have it, they can get it sent from another library, so it just makes it so easy for me and inexpensive, so.
Well, and I was just talking to a good friend the other day who's an avid reader, and she said that she bought a $30 hardcover, and then when she got it home and realized it was $30, she was like, this is too much, and she took it back. And this is a friend who's actually an author. So
Wow.
we have a certain tolerance for what we're willing to spend, but if you love a writer, buying their book is also one of the things that you can do to keep them writing. So it's not abstract, that $30 or, $20 for paperback, it matters. So it's kind of everything. I think the takeaway is that, yes, you can go to the library and check out books, but still buy books, buy them when you can. And then if you, love a book, maybe you gift it to someone or lend them that book. And it's tough. This is a tough industry for all these reasons, Grant. Like, not all of us have, infinite space.
We can't solve how to make money as a writer or publisher, right?
We cannot.
Yeah, or even a library. I was going to say, just tell people, tell 3 people about a book you love. That's the other currency that authors actually need. I was actually talking to a bookstore owner recently, and she told me that word of mouth is the number one thing that drives book sales. That's the way she experienced it. Not ads, not reviews, but hearing a book recommended by a friend. So please go out and recommend the books you love to others. They might just buy them. And that's how, we work at Memoir Nation. So please sign up for a membership on memoirnation.com. Join our community and tell your friends to write with them and continue this conversation. So we appreciate that you're listening, your writing, and everything that goes into showing up and telling your story.